It was supposed to be the happiest day of my daughter's life. She looked radiant in her white dress, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I had always dreamed of walking her down the aisle, but life didn't go the way I planned. You see, I wasn't a wealthy man. After my wife passed away years ago, I worked multiple jobs, cleaning offices at night, repairing cars during the day, just to raise my daughter. I never remarried. Every dollar I earned went into giving her the best education I could afford. She never once complained about the small apartment we lived in or the fact that I couldn't buy her expensive gifts. She always told me, "Dad, one day I'll make you proud." And on this day, she truly did. But things didn't go as smoothly as you'd imagine. The wedding was being held at an extravagant country club, something I could have never dreamed of affording. The groom's family was wealthy, and everything about the event screamed luxury. Crystal chandeliers, designer suits, champagne fountains. I felt out of place the moment I walked in with my old suit, one I had worn for over 15 years. It was neatly pressed, but compared to the designer tuxedos around me, I stood out like a sore thumb. I didn't mind, though. I was there for my daughter. As I made my way toward her, I noticed the groom's expression change. He wasn't smiling. In fact, he looked embarrassed. He whispered something to his best man, then frowned at me as if I didn't belong. I tried to ignore it. But the moment that shook me came just before the ceremony. The groom walked up to two of the security guards and, loud enough for several guests to hear, said, "Get this poor man out of here. He doesn't belong at my wedding." The words cut through me like a knife. My heart sunk. For a second, I thought I misheard him, but no, he was pointing at me. The guards hesitated, clearly unsure what to do. Everyone's eyes turned in my direction. Some people whispered, others laughed quietly, as if I was some kind of intruder. Before I could even say a word, one of the guards shook his head and replied, "We can't. He's a VIP." The entire room went silent. The groom's face turned pale. My daughter, who had been adjusting her veil at the side, froze and looked straight at us. I was as shocked as everyone else. Why would the guard say that? Then, slowly, the guard continued, "Sir, this man isn't just a guest. He's the reason this wedding is even possible. Without him, none of this would exist." At that moment, something shifted in the air. Guests leaned in, curious. Even the groom's wealthy parents looked confused. The guard explained further, though he didn't reveal everything just yet. I could feel my throat tighten, tears threatening to fall. My daughter's eyes glistened with emotion. She knew the truth. But the groom? He had no idea who I really was beyond the poor man in an old suit. And now the truth was about to come out in front of everyone. The silence in the hall was deafening. Every eye was fixed on me, the so-called poor man, who had just been labeled a VIP by the security guard. The groom's face twisted with confusion and anger. "VIP?" he barked, his voice echoing. "This man showed up in a cheap suit. He's nothing. My wedding doesn't need charity cases wandering around." I clenched my fists, holding back my emotions. I didn't want to ruin my daughter's special day by starting an argument, but the security guard's words had already lit a fire in the room. People began whispering. The guard stepped forward, his voice steady. "With respect, sir, you don't know who this man is. We do. The club owners do. And you should too." The groom's parents exchanged uneasy glances. My daughter was trembling, her lips pressed tight as if holding back tears. Finally, she stepped closer to the crowd and said softly but firmly, "That poor man you're talking about is my father. The man who raised me single-handedly after my mom died. The man who worked night and day so I could be standing here today in this dress." Her voice cracked. "If anyone deserves respect in this room, it's him." Gasps rippled through the guests. The groom shifted uncomfortably, but instead of backing down, he sneered. "So what? He worked some low-end jobs? That doesn't make him important. This wedding is about us, not about some old man clinging to his pride." That was when the second security guard, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. "You really don't know the full story, do you?" he asked. The groom's brows furrowed. "What story?" The guard gestured toward me. "This man isn't just her father. He's the reason this entire country club is still standing. Years ago, when the owners were on the verge of shutting it down, he worked here, fixing broken pipes, repairing cars in the parking lot, hauling supplies, without ever asking for extra pay. He saved this place when no one else cared. That's why the owners call him a VIP. That's why every staff member here respects him." The guests erupted in whispers again, this time with admiration. Some nodded in recognition, as if they had heard the story before. The groom's face flushed red. He spat. "That's nonsense. He's just making up stories to embarrass me." But my daughter had tears streaming down her cheeks now. She turned to the groom, her voice shaking. "You embarrassed yourself. You humiliated my father in front of everyone just because he doesn't fit your idea of wealth. Do you know how many nights he went without eating so I could? Do you know he sold his car to pay my tuition? Do you even realize that every dream I ever had came true because of him?" The groom tried to protest, but the room was no longer on his side. Guests glared at him. Some even shook their heads in disgust. I finally spoke, my voice calm but steady. "Son, I never asked for recognition. I came here today only to see my daughter happy. I may not have riches, but I have something you clearly lack: respect for others." The hall fell silent again. My daughter reached for my hand, squeezing it tightly. Then something unexpected happened. The groom's own father stood up. His voice was stern, filled with disappointment. "Young man," he addressed his son, "I've been quiet for too long, but enough is enough. I've built wealth, yes, but I've also made mistakes. And one of them was raising you to think money is the only thing that matters. Today you disrespected the very man who sacrificed everything for the woman you claim to love. That is not how a husband should behave." The groom looked stunned. "Dad!" But his father raised a hand. "No. If you can't respect her father, you don't deserve her hand in marriage." The crowd gasped again. My daughter's face turned pale. She looked at the groom, then at me. Tears filled her eyes, not of sorrow, but of clarity. She turned to the groom, her voice steady now. "I can't marry a man who looks down on the people I love most. If you can't honor my father, you'll never honor me." The groom's jaw dropped. He tried to plead, but it was too late. My daughter removed the ring from her finger and placed it back in his hand. A hush swept through the room. The guests watched in awe as she walked toward me, clutching my arm. "Dad, let's go home." For the first time in years, I felt truly seen, not for my poverty, but for the sacrifices I made out of love. As we walked out, the guests began to clap, not for the canceled wedding, not for the scandal, but for the bond between a father and a daughter, a bond no amount of money could break. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. Sometimes life gives us trials, not to shame us, but to reveal who truly deserves a place in our hearts. As for the groom, well, I never saw him again, but I'll tell you this. My daughter went on to build a life filled with respect, kindness, and love. She found someone years later who didn't just see her beauty, but also valued the man who raised her. And that, my friends, was worth more than any wedding in the world. The days after the broken wedding were not easy. My daughter cried for nights, Not because she regretted leaving the groom, but because she realized how blind she had been. She admitted to me, "Dad, I thought he was the one, but I was so focused on his promises and lifestyle that I ignored the way he looked down on people, especially you." I hugged her tightly. "Sweetheart," I told her, "don't blame yourself. Sometimes life has to break our hearts so we can see the truth more clearly." News of the wedding fiasco spread quickly. Some guests had filmed parts of the scene, and within days, clips were circulating online. Strangers from across the country sent messages of support, praising my daughter's courage for standing up for her father. They called her the bride with the brave heart, and me the father who gave everything. Meanwhile, the groom's reputation took a heavy blow. His arrogant behavior became the subject of endless criticism. Business partners started distancing themselves from his family, and even his own father kept his distance. Pride had cost him not only a wife, but also respect in his community. But for us, life took a different turn. One afternoon, about a month after the wedding, I received a phone call from the country club manager. He said, "Sir, the owners were deeply touched by what happened. They want to honor you for your years of sacrifice and dedication." I was shocked. Honor me? I didn't do anything special. I just did what any father would do. But a week later, the club held a small ceremony in my name. They unveiled a plaque near the entrance. "In honor of a father's sacrifice, dedicated to the man who gave everything for love." My daughter stood beside me as they revealed it. Tears streamed down her face. Guests clapped. I felt embarrassed, but also deeply grateful. Life slowly began to change. My daughter found a new job opportunity, partly because employers admired her courage and integrity. She started working for a nonprofit organization that helped underprivileged students get into college, a mission inspired by the sacrifices she had seen me make. As for me, I continued my simple life. I still wore my old suit, still fixed cars for neighbors, and still lived in our modest apartment. But something was different now. People looked at me not with pity, but with respect. 2 years later, something wonderful happened. My daughter introduced me to a young man she had met through her work. His name was Daniel. He wasn't rich, he was a school teacher, but he had a kind heart. He greeted me with a firm handshake, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "Sir, I've heard a lot about you. I want you to know if I'm ever lucky enough to marry your daughter, I'll honor you as much as I honor her." That was all I needed to hear. When they eventually got married, it was nothing like the extravagant country club event. The ceremony was held in a small garden, decorated with simple flowers and fairy lights. No fancy chandeliers, no champagne fountains, just close friends, family, and a whole lot of love. This time, when I walked my daughter down the aisle, there was no one to mock my old suit. Instead, people smiled and clapped with genuine warmth. And as I handed her to Daniel, she whispered, "Dad, this time I know I'm marrying the right man, because he sees me and he sees you for who we truly are." At that moment, I realized something powerful. Life has a way of testing us with trials, but if we hold on to our values, love, respect, sacrifice, everything works out in the end. The groom from the first wedding, I later heard he moved away, struggling to rebuild his reputation. Some said he never truly changed, while others claimed he lived in regret. But honestly, I stopped caring. His story no longer mattered to me, because ours had a better ending. A daughter who learned the true meaning of love, a father who finally received respect for his sacrifices, and a future built not on money or appearances, but on kindness and honor. And that, my friends, is a story I'll carry with me until my last breath. Years rolled by after my daughter's second wedding. Life settled into a rhythm, quiet but full of meaning. Daniel proved himself to be exactly the kind of man I had prayed for my daughter. He wasn't wealthy,
But his wealth was in his character. He respected me, visited often, and treated me like a father. A year later, my daughter gave birth to a little girl. When they placed that baby in my arms, I felt emotions I couldn't describe. Her tiny fingers curled around mine, and tears filled my eyes. I whispered, "You don't know it yet, sweetheart, but your grandfather would give the world for you." Watching my daughter as a mother was one of the greatest joys of my life. I saw her teach her child the same values she had learned from me: kindness, humility, respect. Sometimes when I babysat my granddaughter, she'd ask, "Grandpa, why do people call you a hero?" I'd chuckle and say, "I'm no hero, darling. I'm just a dad who tried his best." But life has a way of circling back. One evening, about 5 years later, I was walking home from the store when I saw a man sitting outside a cafe. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and he looked completely lost. At first I didn't recognize him. But then, as he turned his head, my heart skipped a beat. It was him, the groom. The man who once told security to throw me out of my own daughter's wedding. For a moment I froze. Memories of that painful day came flooding back. Part of me wanted to keep walking, to ignore him completely. But another part of me, the part that had lived through hardship, knew I couldn't. I walked over slowly. He looked up, his eyes tired and hollow. When he saw me, he flinched. "You," he muttered. His voice was hoarse. "Why now?" I sat down across from him. "Life has a strange way of bringing people back together," I said quietly. He laughed bitterly. "I suppose you're here to enjoy seeing me like this. The mighty have fallen, right?" I shook my head. "I didn't come to gloat. I came because I know what it's like to struggle. But I also know the choices we make define us. Back then, you chose pride over love. And this," I gestured at his state, "is the cost." He lowered his gaze, ashamed. "I lost everything," he admitted. "My business partners dropped me, my family barely speaks to me, and the truth is, I regret that day. I regret how I treated you." There was a long silence. Then I said something he clearly didn't expect. "I forgive you." His head snapped up. "What?" "I forgive you," I repeated. "Not because you deserve it, but because carrying hatred in my heart only weighs me down. I won't let your mistakes steal any more of my peace." For the first time, his eyes softened. He didn't thank me. Maybe pride still lingered, but I could see something shift inside him. When I left that cafe, I realized something important. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't erase the past, but it frees us from chains we were never meant to carry. That night, as I tucked my granddaughter into bed, she asked, "Grandpa, why are you smiling?" I kissed her forehead and whispered, "Because love wins, darling. It always does." And I knew then that my legacy wouldn't be measured in money or houses or status. My legacy was in the people I raised, the love I gave, and the forgiveness I chose, even when it was hardest.
Time never stops. Years passed, and my hair grew whiter, my hands shakier. But my heart, it was fuller than ever. My daughter and Daniel had 2 more children, a boy and another girl. Suddenly, my little apartment was always filled with laughter, tiny footsteps running down the hallway, and the sound of children's voices calling, "Grandpa! Grandpa!" Those words were my greatest treasure. I didn't have riches to leave them. I didn't have estates or stocks or big business deals. What I gave them instead were stories. Every evening, I'd gather the kids around me and tell them tales, not just of kings and castles, but of real life, of how their mother grew up, of the struggles we faced, of the power of sacrifice and kindness. "Grandpa," my grandson once asked, "why did you never give up even when life was so hard?" I smiled at him. "Because giving up would have meant losing the chance to see you one day. And you, my boy, were worth every struggle." Word of our family's journey continued to spread in our community. The plaque at the country club became something of a local landmark. People would stop, read the words, and sometimes even ask me about it if they recognized me. "You're the man from the wedding story, aren't you?" strangers would say. At first, it embarrassed me, but eventually I accepted it. If my story could remind even one person to respect their parents or choose love over pride, then it was worth being remembered. One particularly moving moment came when my granddaughter's school invited me to speak on life lessons from the elders. At first, I hesitated. What could a poor man in an old suit teach these kids? But when I stood before them, looking into their curious eyes, the words came naturally. I told them about my life, my late wife, the struggles of raising my daughter alone, the pain of that first wedding, and the joy of seeing my daughter stand up for love and respect. When I finished, the entire room clapped. Some of the children even had tears in their eyes. One teacher later told me, "Sir, you've inspired these kids more than you'll ever know. Many of them don't come from wealthy homes. Your story shows them that dignity doesn't come from money. It comes from character." That night when I came home, my daughter hugged me and said, "Dad, you've become more than a father. You're a teacher for everyone." I never imagined my simple, difficult life would become a lesson for others. As I grew older, I spent more time in the garden, watching the kids play. Sometimes I'd close my eyes and imagine my late wife sitting beside me, smiling. I'd whisper to her in my heart, "We did it. Our daughter is safe, she's happy, and she's raising good children. We didn't fail." And every time my granddaughter wrapped her tiny arms around me and said, "Grandpa, you're my hero," I knew that my story, our story, would live on long after I was gone. Because in the end, life isn't about what we leave behind in banks or buildings. It's about the love we leave in hearts. And that love, I knew, would carry my family forward for generations.
The seasons kept changing, and with each passing year, I watched my daughter's family blossom. What once was just the two of us, father and daughter, had grown into a home filled with laughter, warmth, and love. Sometimes, when I sat on the porch watching my grandchildren chase each other around the yard, I thought about the road that had brought me here, the pain, the sacrifices, the humiliation I once faced. And yet, every trial had been worth it, because it all led to this. One summer evening, Daniel walked up to me while the kids played with sparklers in the yard. He handed me a glass of lemonade and said, "Dad, I've been meaning to tell you something. You may not have riches, but you gave us something far greater. You gave us the foundation of this family." I smiled at him. "And you, son, gave me peace of mind. A father's greatest worry is whether his child will be loved when he's gone. You've given me that comfort." We clinked our glasses together. But life wasn't always just peace and joy. There were challenges, too. One year, my daughter lost her job due to company downsizing. The stress weighed on her, and I could see the old fear in her eyes. Fear of losing stability, fear of going back to hard times. I sat her down and reminded her, "Sweetheart, remember how I raised you, with nothing but determination and faith. You have far more now. You'll get through this." True enough, within months she found a new job, even better than the last, leading a program that supported single parents. It was as if life itself was rewarding her for carrying forward the values I'd instilled in her. Meanwhile, my story in the community continued to grow in unexpected ways. The local newspaper wrote an article titled, "The Father Who Became a Legend Without Wealth." Soon after, a journalist asked to interview me for a television segment. At first, I laughed. Why would anyone care about an old man's story? But when the interview aired, people from all over the country reached out. They shared how my story gave them hope. Fathers wrote letters saying they felt seen. Children wrote saying they understood their parents' sacrifices better. One letter stood out. It was from a young woman who said, "I was about to marry someone who treated my parents with disrespect. After hearing your story, I realized I was making a mistake. You saved me from choosing pride over love." I read that letter again and again, amazed at how far the ripples of my simple life had spread. At family gatherings, the grandchildren would tease me. "Grandpa, you're famous," they'd say. I'd laugh and reply, "Famous? No. I'm just stubborn. Too stubborn to give up when life told me to." But deep down, I knew they saw me as something more, and that knowledge filled my heart with gratitude. As years went on, I found myself spending more time teaching my grandchildren small lessons: how to plant seeds in the garden, how to fix a squeaky door, how to be patient when things didn't go their way. I told them the little things matter. Respect others, work hard, and love deeply. That's the secret to a good life. One day, my eldest granddaughter said, "Grandpa, when I grow up, I want to make you proud the way Mom made you proud." I hugged her tightly, tears brimming in my eyes. "You already do, sweetheart. You already do." And as the sun set behind us, painting the sky in hues of gold and red, I realized something. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to my daughter, my grandchildren, and even to strangers who found hope in it. It was no longer the story of a poor man in an old suit. It was the story of love's victory over pride, of family's triumph over wealth, and respect that endured across generations. Time flowed quietly, yet powerfully. The laughter of my grandchildren filled the rooms, echoing against the walls of our small but warm home. Each sound reminded me of the long journey we had traveled, from days of struggle to moments of triumph, from fear of loss to the security of love. And every day I found myself reflecting on what truly mattered. One afternoon, I sat on the porch with my granddaughter Lily, who was barely 7, drawing little pictures in her sketchbook. She looked up at me with wide eyes and asked, "Grandpa, why do you always help everyone, even strangers?" I smiled softly. "Because, Lily, life doesn't just ask for wealth or titles. It asks for kindness. Every little act, every sacrifice shapes the world around us. Even if no one notices, it matters." She tilted her head thoughtfully, then scribbled a picture of our family: me, her mom, Daniel, and the little ones. "I want to be like you when I grow up," she said. "I want to help people too." Her words struck a chord deep in my heart. I realized then that my legacy wasn't about recognition or plaques. It was in the lives I touched, in the values I instilled in my children, and now in the next generation. Weeks later, the neighborhood hosted a small fair, and our family participated. While the children played games, I watched Daniel help organize the event, guiding volunteers and greeting every attendee with warmth. I felt a quiet pride. My daughter had chosen a man who not only loved her, but shared the lessons I had spent a lifetime teaching: respect, humility, and the courage to do the right thing. That evening, as we walked home, my daughter spoke softly beside me. "Dad, I want to start a new tradition," she said, holding my hand. "Every year, on this day, we help a family in need, together." I nodded, feeling the weight and beauty of her words. "I think that's perfect. And someday, Lily and her brother will carry it forward too." Months passed, and life continued in its quiet rhythm. I still fixed doors, repaired cars, and tended to our tiny garden, but I did it with a new sense of peace. Neighbors came by not for money, not for favors, but for advice, for stories, and for a listening ear, and I gave it freely. Just as life had taught me, the greatest gifts are often intangible. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting golden light across the yard, I noticed the old country club plaque. It glinted faintly in the distance. I thought of the day it was unveiled, of the shock, the shame, the pride, and the love. And I realized that honor wasn't something given by wealth or society. It was a reflection of integrity, lived quietly, without fanfare. Later that night, I tucked Lillian to bed. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "Grandpa, I want everyone to know about you when I grow up. I want them to know what love really means." I kissed her forehead. "You don't have to tell the world, sweetheart. Live it, and people will see it through your actions. That's the most powerful story of all." As I lay awake that night, I thought about the years behind me, the struggles, the humiliations, the victories, the love, and realized something profound. Life's true wealth is measured not in money, but in the people we nurture, the hearts we touch, and the courage to forgive even when it's hardest. And so, with the soft sounds of my family around me, I finally understood that every trial, every tear, and every small act of love had been worth it. Because in the end, we weren't just living, we were building a legacy of respect, compassion, and unshakable love, one generation at a time. And I knew with all my heart that our story was far from over. Years had passed, and life had settled into a quiet, comforting rhythm. Our home, once small and filled only with memories of struggle, was now alive with laughter, chatter, and the energy of 3 grandchildren. I often sat in my favorite chair by the window, watching them run through the garden, their joy reminding me of everything I had worked so hard for. I thought about my daughter, the little girl who once clutched my hand in a white dress, facing a world that judged her father by his suit. She had grown into a woman of grace, strength, and compassion. Every choice she made reflected the values I had tried to instill: courage, humility, and love that demanded nothing in return. One afternoon, Daniel came to me with a stack of letters. "People still write to you, Dad," he said with a smile. "They say your story changed the way they see their parents, their children, and even themselves." I chuckled softly, feeling a lump in my throat. "I never asked for this," I said. "I just wanted to love my daughter the way her mother and I always dreamed of doing." But the letters kept coming, from strangers and neighbors alike. Stories of fathers who chose respect over pride, of children who finally understood the sacrifices made for them, of families inspired to show love in quiet, meaningful ways. It was humbling, but it made me realize that even the simplest life, lived with integrity, could touch countless hearts. That evening, as the sun set in a wash of gold and purple, I sat on the porch with all 3 grandchildren gathered around me. They listened intently as I shared stories of the past, of their mother's childhood, of the day of the first wedding, of lessons learned the hard way. Their eyes widened with wonder, and their small hands clutched mine tightly. "Grandpa," my eldest granddaughter said, her voice soft but serious, "will we ever forget these stories?" I smiled and shook my head. "No, darling. You'll carry them with you. And when you live your lives with love, courage, and respect, you'll tell them again to the people you love. That is how stories last forever, not in books or plaques, but in hearts." I glanced at my daughter who stood nearby, watching the children with a gentle smile. She had built a life rooted in the lessons of her childhood, and now she was passing those lessons on to her children. She had taken the pain and trials of our past and transformed them into something powerful, a legacy of character, not wealth, of love, not appearances. Later that night, after tucking the children into bed, I sat quietly in the garden. The stars shone above, each one reminding me of moments that had shaped my life. The laughter, the tears, the sacrifices, the triumphs. I whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude for my late wife, for my daughter, for Daniel, for the family we had built, and for the life that had taught me the deepest lessons about love, patience, and forgiveness. I knew now that legacy wasn't measured in riches, titles, or recognition. It was measured in the people we raised, the hearts we touched, and the courage to act with love even when the world didn't see or appreciate it. And as I watched my family sleeping peacefully inside, I felt an immense sense of peace. Life had given me trials, yes, but it had also given me joy beyond measure, a joy rooted in love, endurance, and the knowledge that every act of kindness rippled far beyond what we could ever imagine. The story of the poor man in the old suit had become something far greater than I ever could have hoped for. It had become the story of life itself, of mistakes and forgiveness, of trials and triumphs, of a family who learned that love and respect always outshine wealth and appearances. And as the night settled over our home, I whispered softly, almost to myself, "This is the story I leave behind. Not in money, not in monuments, but in hearts." And that, my dear ones, is worth everything. Because in the end, life isn't about the struggles we face, the money we earn, or the recognition we receive. It's about the love we give, the lessons we teach, and the courage to stand with integrity, no matter the cost. And in that truth, our story, our family, and our love would live on forever.